going to give a couple of comments this morning, but we jump-started because we got the permanent rep, the U.S. rep to NATO, and so we wanted to get him on in time. So let me give you a couple of comments now. The second half of our day is about the future of the U.S.-EU relationship on technology and innovation. This is the first time that we've hosted this forum in Brussels, in the heart of the European Union. Previously, we hosted the conference in Frankfurt and Berlin, last year in New York City, and I've been to all of those. Josh and Jorn don't want me to share where we're going to go to next year, but it's going to be really exciting. And it's going to be in the United States, but I promise, Josh, I'm not going to tell people until the end, and then you can share it with some people. But the ideas remained the same from the start, and that's that finance and economics are deeply intertwined. They anchored the U.S.-European alliance, and we need to chart a new way forward at this inflection point in history. I don't think there's ever been a more important time in Europe for both security and defense, and for innovation and growth. And those dual challenges are what we've been talking about all day. I'm going to talk about with the U.S. ambassador in a moment. It's also true what we took granted for about economics and geopolitics has changed dramatically since we first met in Frankfurt in 2022. This past year, with the start of the second Trump administration, has seen a shaking of the global trade order. The transatlantic relationship experienced the risk of a trade war and then stepped back and found a path toward a deal, and you heard a lot about that today with Commissioner Shefčovič. The same is true on defense. When the second Trump administration began, there were concerns about U.S. commitment to NATO. I didn't share them because I knew the people were coming in. I knew how they felt about NATO. They didn't want to leave NATO. They just wanted NATO's allies to do more, and NATO's allies have done more. The 5% defense spending target for NATO, 3.5% core, and 1.5% related. We should celebrate these achievements today, but not revel in them. This is a tenuous and volatile moment, and together, Europe and North America have to forge our history forward, and that's why we're gathered here. This forum is designed to bring together leading voices at the intersection of finance, economics, and national security to help re-anchor the U.S.-European relationship. Each forum has had its own mission. The first in Frankfurt was the foundation that allowed us to present a framework for economic statecraft 1 year later in Berlin. The ideas from New York of using economic tools not only to secure supply chains, but to bolster industrial policy feel more timely than ever in this new era of geoeconomics. As countries increasingly reach for economic tools to achieve their objectives and decide how to handle China, alignment among allies is more important than ever. And that's what this relationship and partnership was built on. It remains the world's single most important economic and political partnership, and the Atlantic Council was created to support both the economic and defense pillars of this alliance and realize that they're interconnected. The EU, the UK, and the US represent nearly half of global GDP. So, over the course of this afternoon, you'll hear keynotes from the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Teresa Ribera, and Commissioner for Economy and Productivity, Valdis Dombrovskis. And we'll close the day with powerhouse panels on AI, the euro, and the dollar. But first, we open up the second part of our program with a man who is brand new in his job. He's been here for a month, and he's graciously agreed to join us for one of his first public events in Brussels. So please join me in welcoming the U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Andrew Puzder, to the Transatlantic Forum.
Thank you, Frederick.
We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to be short in my introduction, but just to tell you that the ambassador is a globally renowned business leader, political commentator, author, attorney, and retired chief executive officer. He's also taken a stab and made some investments in Europe, so we'll talk about that as well. But I want to get right into the questions, and so why don't I skip a really impressive CV and get to the questions.
Good idea. Let's skip that.
So you heard me talk about the sort of existential moment, if you have, where Europe has to do two things at the same time. build more for defense, build more in the economy. You've just arrived. Can you tell us how you're setting your own priorities for your time in Brussels at the European Union, and what are your expectations for the U.S.-EU relationship?
So it's it's an interesting time to be in Europe. Europe, for so many years, had built a very strong, a very prosperous economy based on a three-legged stool, which was basically the United States would cover defense costs, cheap Russian energy, and a retail market in China that seemed like it would never go away. Since 2022 and the invasion, the Ukrainian invasion by the Russians, Russian oil's gone. America now has to focus a lot of its defense capabilities on Asia. China, the consumer market there, even in China, has been drying up, but certainly they've been exporting more than they've been importing. So we've seen that three-legged stool collapse, and that three-legged stool was supporting a very significant social welfare state. Now we find Europe in a position where it has to increase its defense spending, up to this new 5% limit. So at the same time that it's got to increase defense spending, it's found that the economic structure that it built its social welfare system on has crumbled. So there are only two ways that Europe can meet its defense spending obligations. One is to reduce what it spends elsewhere, which that's politically going to be very, very difficult to do. And the other is to generate economic growth. And we've got the report from former Italian Prime Minister Draghi, Professor Draghi, last year, saying, look, we've got to support innovation, we've got to support entrepreneurship, we've got to get the kind of economic growth that's going to turn the economy in Europe around. Our economy was larger than that of the United States back in 2008, when the United Kingdom was part of the EU. It's now 30% smaller if you include the UK. It's 50% smaller if you exclude the UK. There was a report in Eurovision recently that said that, I found this fascinating. Germany's economy, GDP per capita in Germany, is now lower than it is in the state of West Virginia in the United States. West Virginia is the 49th on a list of 50 states in GDP per capita. And if you look at the EU generally, you look at France, you look at Italy, you look at Spain, their GDP per capita is actually now below Mississippi, which was the 50th state as far as ranking in GDP per capita. So we're at a time when economic growth in Europe is incredibly important, and it is in the best interest of the United States to have a strong trading partner, to have an economically strong Europe. You need Europe strong for trade purposes. We also need Europe strong for defense purposes, so they can cover their defense costs, and perhaps can help us in other troubled parts of the world where the United States is addressing an issue where maybe Europe could address it better or could at least assist in our addressing it. So a strong EU isn't only in the interest of the citizens of the European Union, it's also in the best interest of the United States. So what I want to do here to get to my agenda, which was your question, I guess that was a long lead up to actually answering your question. I think number one, it's important that we implement the trade agreement we came to with Europe. And I want to emphasize something I think that Europeans don't emphasize enough. Look, Europe got a really good deal in this trade deal. I know that's not the popular opinion here, but I think if people look at it more rationally and less emotionally, it's a very good deal. Now, President Trump is a great negotiator. He got a great deal for the United States. But Europe agreed to buy $750 billion in energy, and they probably should have made that $1 trillion, because if you're agreeing to buy $750 billion, we're agreeing to sell it, and Europe needs energy particularly if they're going to participate in this AI economy and stop the deindustrialization that's going on. So it's important that we have this strong Europe, and then you've got $600 billion that Europe's going to invest in the United States. But unlike Japan and South Korea that are actually investing the government's money, taxpayer money from those countries in the United States, for Europe it's all coming from the private sector. So the European Union or the 27 sovereign nations aren't making that investment. Tariffs are down to 15%, but there's no stacking, which means that if there's a higher tariff on something like steel and iron, you don't add 15% on top of the higher tariff. You end up paying either 50%, or if the tariff's below 15%, you pay the 15%. That didn't happen with Japan and South Korea. And as you know, we've got very high tariffs on Switzerland now that did not come to an agreement with the United States on trade. So I think Europe got a very good deal. I think the markets here in Europe have been doing well, and I think part of the reason is they realize this is a good deal. So I'm hoping that gets ratified soon in the European Parliament. So there's implementing the trade agreement, incredibly important. There's dealing with China, trying to make sure that we have a joint recognition between the EU and the United States as to the strategic and economic threat of the People's Republic of China. And I've actually found that there's more alignment on that here in the EU than I thought there was going to be. There's regulatory. The proper word is simplification. I've been told I can't say deregulation because it makes everybody upset, but simplification. So we're going to need to do some simplification of these regulations, which ties into trade. That ties into the trade agreement as well. And then finally, trying to bring peace into Ukraine. As Secretary Rubio said, we don't need to end the war in Ukraine. We need peace in Ukraine. We need to stop the killing. We need to stop the carnage. We need to stop the destruction. It needs to come to an end. And I think President Trump has been adamant that that's what he wants to see happen. So to the extent we can influence that, I can influence that as his representative here. I intend to do that.
A really, really important opening answer. Thank you so much for that. Implementing the trade agreement, working together on China, regulatory simplification, and then peace in Ukraine. That's a heavy agenda, and I think a really important statement that I think a lot of my friends in the European Union don't always recognize is how strongly you said it's in the United States' interest to have a strong European Union. Within that, President Trump called it the biggest deal ever made in terms of trade. You talked about why it's a good deal. What are your priorities for the next chapter of U.S.-EU trade?
Obviously, the next thing that has to happen is we have to get the deal done. I mean, we have the framework now. We got to get it done. That's number one. Number two, we need to deal with certain particular issues. I think steel and aluminum is probably the most prominent. There are a lot of issues around steel and aluminum. There's sovereignty issues on both sides with the EU and the United States. There are national security issues, and there's also the issue of dealing with the overabundance, the overproduction of steel and aluminum out there by a country which will go unnamed that we need to address. But I'd say, in general, going forward, once we deal with those particular issues, I think the simplification efforts are incredibly important. We've got these non-tariff barriers to trade, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and Reporting Directive, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Marketing Act. We've got a number of regulatory initiatives that are an impediment to trade, an impediment to moving forward on trade. Now, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the Reporting Directive are dealt with specifically in the framework agreement. There's a paragraph that talks about cutting those back. And actually, it's important for Europe that they get cut back. It's more important for Europe than it is even for the United States. Chancellor Merz and President Macron have both said it should be repealed. And they're not saying that because that's in America's best interest. They're saying that's in the best interest of Germany and France. So there's a real impetus to move forward with changing those two. On the digital services bill, I think there are a lot of misunderstandings between the United States and Europe as to what it does. We need to get together and understand each side's interpretation of the agreement. Because I can tell you, there's no president of either party, and I can tell you President Trump in particular, is going to tolerate a foreign government restricting the First Amendment, fundamental free speech, free expression rights of American citizens to an extent that the United States government can't even regulate those rights. So we need to come to an understanding as to what's happening with the Digital Services Act. The Digital Marketing Act, we need to make sure that it's not intended to penalize companies because they're American and large. If that's the intent, then that's an issue we need to address. That's not the way you treat allies. If that's not the intent, then America needs to come to an understanding in that respect.
Thank you for that. So You and I were looking at something I'm going to put up on the screen before we came in here, and if I could cue up this coming to the screen. We've seen in the Draghi report what needs to be done in terms of reform, in terms of growth. We've seen in the agreements in NATO what needs to be done to be in defense spending. You've watched Europe for many years. You're talking about some of the signs that are good right now. Look at what's happened here, newly created $10 billion plus companies in the comparison of the US versus the European Union. It's pretty striking. What do you see that gives you faith that Europe is willing to move this time? If it is such an important time, are you confident that this is the time that Europe will make the changes it needs to make?
Yeah, you have to look at this graph and say, well, why would this happen? Like, how did this happen? And as I said, John, how does Germany end up with a GDP per capita that's less than that in West Virginia, or France, worse than Mississippi? And the reason the Europeans throughout history have been entrepreneurial. They've been innovative. Much of the innovation that Western civilization has brought about has come from a very few countries in Europe. And so why did this happen? Well, there's really two reasons. One is that there has been in place a regulatory regime that makes it very difficult to do business and to start a business in Europe. When I was running CKE Restaurants, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a company that owns about 4,000 Carl's Jr. and Hardee's restaurants worldwide. And for those who don't know what Carl's Jr. and Hardee's are, they're quick service hamburger restaurants. And in 2013, a company called Quick came up for sale. And I looked at it because we wanted to grow in Europe. We had a few restaurants in Denmark, but really no restaurants anywhere else in Europe. It was a huge opportunity for us. And I looked at Quick and looked at the union requirements, the regulatory requirements, all of the things you had to do to run a restaurant in Europe. And I said, I'm not doing that. We're not buying that company. If we're going to grow in Europe, it's going to be franchisees because the Europeans may know how to do business in Europe, but for me, it's just way too difficult. And we didn't buy the company. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there are many people who've looked to start companies and decided they would be better off starting them in the United States than starting them here. Or if you started a company in, Berlin or Paris, and it started to get some traction, you're probably thinking, I'm going to move to the United States with that company because I can profit more myself if I do that. It'd be easier to run the company. So I think there are regulatory problems. The other problem is fuel. Fuel costs in Europe have really skyrocketed, and energy runs the world. You look at countries that are energy rich, and you'll find a prosperous country. You look at countries that are energy poor, and you will find countries that are not prosperous. And in the United States, one difference I've noticed since I've been here is that when we talk about energy in the United States, everybody talks about energy abundance. When we talk about energy here, it's always about energy efficiency or energy cleanliness. It's not about energy abundance. And so energy costs a lot more. And it's hard to make Volkswagens in Germany that are competitive with these electric vehicles from China when China's buying cheap oil from Russia. And Germany's, taken its nuclear power plants and cemented them over and closed its coal plants and is trying to survive on energy that is just extremely expensive. So particularly if Europe's going to enter the AI age, the artificial intelligence age, they need to start looking at energy, at the problem of energy in the future. Now, the debate up to now has been, can you run an industrial economy on what we'll call clean energy, solar and wind? And, the results haven't been so good in that respect. I think it was Prime Minister Maloney said last week that we're deindustrializing a lot faster than we're decarbonizing. And that's a big issue. You don't want to be deindustrializing. Europe is the only major economic region in the world where the demand for energy has decreased. Not the price, but the demand for energy has decreased. That's, again, not a good sign. It's a sign of deindustrialization. Now, assuming that the argument is still valid, whether or not we could get wind and solar and other renewables and nuclear to a point where you actually could run an industrial economy, where you could actually make Volkswagens and do it profitably or competitively with that kind of energy. That's really yesterday's argument. That's yesterday's problem. Today's problem is if you want to compete in the AI economy, and President von der Leyen was very adamant that that's what Europe needs to do. When I saw her speak with Professor Draghi a week or two ago, the AI economy, digital economy, we're going to go strong. Well, I mean, you really increase the demand for energy when you do that. So it's not just deindustrializing anymore or dealing with industrialization. Now you've got a whole new incredible energy demand going forward that you really need an all-of-the-above approach to energy to meet. Now, if you don't want to do AI, if you don't want to be in the digital economy, I'm not saying people have to do that. I'm certainly not here to dictate policy to anybody. But if you want to participate in AI, you need energy. I mean, the current software that we're all used to using thinks once, right? You get it, you put it in your computer, and it does something for you, thinks once. AI thinks all the time. That's what makes it AI. And it's an incredible energy drain. That's why the United States, we're talking about adding, I think it's 100 gigabytes of energy over the next few years. Well, you know, the old nuclear power plants produce 1 gigabyte of energy. China's adding energy way ahead of what the United States is adding. I mean, they're adding much more than we are. And we're adding all that we can. Now, we're a little bit ahead of them to begin with, so it's not completely a fair comparison. But China's adding, you know, not only solar and wind, but geothermal, and they're adding more coal plants every year, an incredible number of coal plants, oil, gas, whatever they can do to generate electricity, they're doing it because you need it in this AI race, which has implications not only for your economy, but for national defense. This is a national security issue. A huge national security issue. And it would be great to have Europe as a partner as we go forward in this. We're already working with the UK, but it would be great to have the EU as a partner moving forward. But again, it's going to take energy. So energy and encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation, and I think Europe can turn things around. And I think there are people who get that.
That was what I wanted to get to.
There are people
between
who,
1 to 10,
don't.
Between 1 to 10, Europe doesn't get it, and 10, Europe gets it. Where are you on that scale?
Probably, I guess 5 or 6. I mean, and there are definitely, you know, it's funny, the people who don't seem to get the need to grow the economy, which is the only way you can support what you need to do. It's the only way you can do defense, do AI, do all the things you want to do. The only way to grow the economy is to kind of reduce this regulatory state and reduce energy costs. But the people who don't want to do those things are the same people that want to increase and maintain the social welfare system. So it's a different fight here. I'm still trying to come to understand it completely because some of it's a little difficult to understand. But I am encouraged by some people that I speak with who get this. Now they don't agree with me that, you know, we need to make big changes in energy or where you need to deregulate it. And really, the EU's it's not a sovereign nation, but it's close to a sovereign nation. It has many of the attributes of a sovereign nation, but it's made up of 27 sovereign nations. And whatever direction it wants to go in is great. But for the United States, we'd like to see an economically strong Europe. And to do that, I think they need to move in a particular direction. And some people get it and some people don't.
So we've run out of time, but one quick question, quick answer, though I know this one could take a long answer. White House has made clear its desire to see European member states, Union member states, fully divorced from Russian energy. How likely do you think that is? And then what role, I think more importantly, what role do you see the energy relationship playing in the US-EU relationship?
Well, I think that we can be a huge energy supplier. We're already the largest oil and natural gas supplier, and I think the United States, and President Trump in particular, wants the United States to be a reliable supplier of energy to our allies. So I think he's making a big push to do that, and I'm hoping, and I believe that Europe will take advantage of that. As far as oil and gas from Russia, there's really only, well, and he didn't say Europe, he said NATO.
Yeah.
So NATO includes Turkey. Turkey, I think they import about 33 billion in oil from Russia a year. Hungary's about 3 billion. I know Slovakia also imports some. it would be great to see them stop. The president mentioned last week that there's problems with Hungary and Slovakia as they're landlocked. But there is a pipeline through Croatia that we have to see whether that can meet the Hungarians and Slovakians' needs with respect to oil and natural gas. If it can, then they should cut off Russia. Turkey, that's between President Trump and Mr. Erdogan. Those are not conversations I'm privy to, and I think I will decline to comment.
So, Mr. Ambassador, I think everyone in the audience sees that the Trump administration has brought a dynamic, knowledgeable, significant voice to Brussels. We thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm really happy to hear you thought it was more 6 to 10 rather than 2 or 3. Now, hopefully, you can help us get that number up to 8 or 9 over the time you're here. But thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.